Tonight, we're going to Alaska, but not for the beautiful scenery or the amazing northern lights. No, we're going there because 6 people saw something they can't explain. Something that happened when the green lights started dancing across the sky. These aren't fairy tales. These are real people. Real jobs, real terror. And here's what scares me the most. All 6 of them worked the night shift. All 6 of them were alone. And all 6 of them will tell you the same thing. When the aurora comes out, something else comes out too. If you subscribe now and hit that bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Turn off your lights, lock your doors. And whatever you do, don't look outside if you see green lights in the sky. This is 6 most disturbing, true Alaska Aurora night horror stories. Let's begin. My name is Amy Rodriguez, and I've been working night shifts at grocery stores for 12 years. I started when I was 19, fresh out of high school in Fairbanks, Alaska. Over the years, I've worked at 5 different stores, but none of them prepared me for what happened at Midnight Market on Aurora Street. I've dealt with drunk customers, shoplifters, and even a robbery once. But what I experienced during those Aurora nights last winter changed everything I thought I knew about time itself. Some things aren't meant to repeat forever. Let me tell you about Midnight Market first. It's one of those 24-hour grocery stores that stays open all night, every night. The building used to be a warehouse back in the 1970 seconds before they turned it into a store. It sits on the edge of town, surrounded by empty parking lots and a few street lights that barely work. During the day, it's busy with families and workers grabbing lunch. But at night, especially during winter, it becomes a different place entirely. The store has 12 aisles, all numbered with those big plastic signs hanging from the ceiling. Aisle 1 is produce, then you've got dairy, meat, frozen foods, and so on. The checkout area has 4 lanes, but we only keep 1 or 2 open during night shifts. There's a small office in the back where we count money and take breaks. The fluorescent lights buzz constantly, and half of them flicker. The heating system is old and makes weird clicking sounds all night long. I started working there in October. The manager, Dave, was desperate for night shift workers. Most people don't want to work alone in a grocery store from midnight to 8 in the morning. The pay was decent though, $15 an hour, plus extra for working nights. Dave showed me around on my first day, explaining the basic stuff. Stock shelves when it's quiet, help customers, keep the place clean, and watch for shoplifters. The first few weeks were normal. I'd get maybe 10 customers per night, mostly shift workers grabbing snacks or energy drinks. Truck drivers, hospital workers, security guards, noddles, people who work weird hours like me. I spent most of my time stocking shelves, reading magazines, or watching movies on my phone. It was boring, but boring was good. Boring meant no problems. Then the aurora season started. In Alaska, we get the northern lights from September through March, but they're strongest in winter. Some nights, the sky lights up with green and blue colors that dance across the darkness. Tourists come from all over the world to see them. But locals know that aurora nights can be strange. Animals act weird. Electronics sometimes stop working right, and people can act different too. The first aurora night I worked was November 15th. I remember the date because I wrote it down in the logbook. Dave always wanted us to note anything unusual that happened during our shifts. I was stocking soup cans around 2 a.m. when Mrs. Patterson walked in. She was maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and a blue winter coat. She grabbed a shopping cart and headed straight to aisle 3, the baking aisle. I watched her from behind the counter as she picked up a bag of flour, sugar, vanilla extract, and chocolate chips, cookie ingredients. She moved like she knew exactly what she needed. At the register, she paid with exact change, IMC dolls, $12.47. She didn't say much, just thank you when I handed her the receipt. Then she left. 3 hours later, she came back. Same blue coat, same shopping cart, same route to aisle 3. Same flour, sugar, vanilla, and chocolate chips. Same exact change. Even the same quiet thank you when she left. I figured maybe she forgot something the first time, or maybe she was baking for a big event and needed more supplies. But then she came back again at 2 a.m. the next aurora night. Same everything. Same clothes, same items, same words, same exact change down to the penny. That's when I started paying closer attention. Over the next few weeks, I noticed it wasn't just Mrs. Patterson, there was Mr. Chen, who came in every Aurora night at 1:30 a.m. for a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, and lunch meat. Always walked to aisle 2 first, then aisle 4, then dairy. Paid with a $20 bill every time, and left the change as a tip. There was Jenny, a young woman about my age, who showed up at 3:15 a.m. during every Aurora. She bought pregnancy tests, tissues, and chocolate ice cream. Always looked nervous, always paid with her credit card, always left without making eye contact. And there was Frank, an older man in a worn leather jacket. He came in at 4 a.m. sharp during Aurora nights, bought a 6-pack of beer and cigarettes, and always asked if we sold lottery tickets. When I told him no, he'd nod and leave. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Maybe these people had weird schedules or habits. Maybe they shopped at the same times, because that's when they got off work. But after watching them for a month, I realized something that made my skin crawl. They never aged. Not even a little bit. Mrs. Patterson's gray hair was always the exact same length. Jenny's nervous expression never changed. Frank's leather jacket had the same scuff marks in the same places every time. And they all had the exact same conversations with me, word for word. Mrs. Patterson: "Excuse me, do you know if these chocolate chips are on sale?" Me: "Let me check. No, just regular price." Her: "That's fine. I'm making cookies for my grandson's birthday tomorrow." Every single time. Same question, same answer, same reason. Her grandson's birthday was apparently tomorrow every Aurora night for 2 months straight. I started testing them. One night, I tried to have a different conversation with Mr. Chen. "Hey, how's it going tonight?" I asked when he approached the counter. He looked right through me and said, "Just these items, please." "Nice weather we're having." I tried. "Just these items, please." It was like talking to a recording. He could only say the exact same things he always said. When I tried to give him different change, he left the exact same tip as always and walked out. I thought maybe I was going crazy. Working night shifts alone can mess with your head. I started writing everything down, what time each person came in, what they bought, what they said. I even took pictures with my phone. When I looked at the photos later, they all looked exactly the same. Mrs. Patterson's cart in the exact same position. Frank's jacket falling the same way. Jenny's hand reaching for the same pregnancy test brand. Then I realized something that made everything worse. These people were shopping like it was the last normal night of their lives. I started paying attention to what they were buying and how they acted. Mrs. Patterson was making cookies for her grandson's birthday, but she seemed sad, like she was trying to create one last happy memory. Jenny was buying pregnancy tests and looked terrified, like she was about to get news that would change everything. Frank was asking about lottery tickets with the desperate hope of someone who needed money badly. I couldn't shake the feeling that these people were all shopping on the night before something terrible happened to them. So I did something that probably sounds crazy. I looked them up online. Mrs. Patterson's full name was Margaret Patterson. I found her obituary dated November 16th, to my S, the day after the first Aurora night I saw her. She died in a car accident driving home from her grandson's birthday party. The cookies she was buying ingredients for were the last thing she ever made. Jenny Martinez. I found her name on her credit card receipt. Her social media stopped updating on November 18th. Her last post was about being scared to take a pregnancy test. Someone commented asking if she was okay, but she never responded. Frank Morrison, ETM. I found him in the local news. He had a heart attack on November 20th. The article mentioned he was a regular at gas stations and convenience stores, always hoping to win the lottery to pay for his medical bills. Mr. Chen was harder to find, but I eventually learned his name was David Chen. He died November 22nd in his sleep. Natural causes, the obituary said. He lived alone. They were all dead, all of them. They had died within days of the first Aurora night I saw them. But somehow, they kept coming back to the store during every Aurora, shopping for the last normal things they bought when they were alive. I started to understand what was happening, and it terrified me more than anything I'd ever experienced. The Aurora was creating some kind of time loop, but only for certain moments. These people were stuck reliving their last ordinary night over and over. They didn't know they were dead. They didn't remember coming to the store before. Every Aurora night, they experienced their final shopping trip for the first time, completely unaware that it would be their last. But here's the part that really scared me. I was changing too. After 2 months of seeing the same people do the same things, I started having weird memories. I would remember conversations that hadn't happened yet. Like, I'd know exactly what Mrs. Patterson was going to say before she said it. I'd remember giving Frank change before he even entered the store. Then I started seeing myself. It was during an Aurora night in January. I was stocking shelves around 3 a.m. when I heard the front door chime. I looked up and saw someone walking in wearing the same midnight market uniform I was wearing. Same name tag, same ponytail, same everything. It was me, but I was still standing by the soup cans. I watched this other version of myself walk to the counter and start counting the cash register. She moved exactly like I did, held her head the same way, even hummed the same song I'd been humming earlier. When she finished counting, she wrote something in the logbook and went to the break room. I followed her, but when I got to the break room, it was empty. The next Aurora night, it happened again. But this time, the other me looked different. Older, more tired, her uniform was wrinkled and her hair was messy. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. This version of me was talking to herself, muttering things I couldn't quite hear. That's when I realized I was seeing my future. Just like Mrs. Patterson and the others, I was trapped in some kind of time echo. But instead of seeing the past, I was seeing what was going to happen to me. And what I saw wasn't good. Over the next few weeks, I saw dozens of different versions of myself during Aurora nights. Some looked normal, just doing regular work stuff, but others looked terrible. I saw myself crying, screaming at empty air, throwing products around the store. I saw myself talking to the dead customers like they could actually hear me. I saw myself getting thinner and paler, like I wasn't eating or sleeping. The worst version I saw was near the end of February. This future me was sitting on the floor in aisle 7, surrounded by torn open food packages. She was eating cold soup straight from the can and talking to people who weren't there. Her hair was falling out in patches, and her eyes looked completely empty. When she saw me watching, she smiled and waved like everything was normal. I tried to change what I was doing, thinking maybe I could avoid those futures. If I saw myself stocking soup, I'd stock bread instead. If I saw myself at the counter, I'd go to the break room. But it didn't matter. Every change I made just created a new future echo, usually worse than the last one. That's when I understood the real horror of what was happening. The Aurora wasn't just showing me the past and future, it was showing me every possible private timeline at once. Every choice I could make, every path my life could take, was happening simultaneously. And I was becoming aware of all of them. I started seeing versions of myself where I quit the job and moved away. Versions where I was successful and happy. Versions where I was married with kids. Versions where I was rich, famous, dying, insane. Every possible Amy Rodriguez that could exist was suddenly real and visible to me. And the worst part? I could swap places with them. It started by accident. During one Aurora night, I was so exhausted that I just wanted to be the version of myself who had quit this job. I was thinking about how much better my life would be if I'd never started working here. Suddenly, I felt this weird pulling sensation, like being sucked through a tunnel. When it stopped, I was standing in a different apartment. My apartment, but not mine. Everything was nicer, better furniture, newer TV, expensive clothes in the closet. There were photos of me with people I didn't recognize, graduation certificates from schools I'd never attended, a job acceptance letter from a company in Seattle. I had swapped places with a version of myself who had made different choices, but it only lasted a few hours. By morning, I was back in my real apartment, my real life. Except now I had memories of both timelines. I remembered quitting Midnight Market and moving to Seattle, but I also remembered never leaving at all. Both experiences felt equally real. This became an obsession. During every Aurora night, I would try to swap into a better timeline. I found versions of myself who were doctors, teachers, artists, world travelers. I lived dozens of different lives in the space of a few hours each. But every swap left traces. I'd come back to my original timeline with objects that didn't belong there. A coffee mug from the timeline where I was a teacher, a photo from the timeline where I was married, a book from the timeline where I was a writer. My apartment started filling up with things from lives I'd never actually lived, and my memories got more and more confused. I couldn't remember which experiences were real and which ones were from other timelines. Did I graduate college or drop out? Did I have a dog as a kid or a cat? Was my first job at a restaurant or a bookstore? Every possible answer felt true. The Aurora was feeding on this confusion. I could feel it getting stronger every time I swapped timelines, like it was collecting pieces of my consciousness from every reality. And I wasn't the only one affected anymore. Other people started showing up during Aurora nights. Living people, not just the dead ones. They looked confused and scared, talking about having strange dreams and memories that didn't match their lives. Some of them worked at other businesses on Aurora Street. The Aurora was spreading, affecting more and more people. I realized that I had to stop it somehow, but every time I tried to resist, I just created more timeline splits. The more I fought against it, the more versions of myself appeared, and the more fragmented I became. By March, I existed in dozens of timelines simultaneously. I was a grocery store clerk, a doctor, a homeless person, a millionaire, a mother, a nun, a criminal, all at the same time. My consciousness was scattered across so many different realities that I could barely remember who I originally was. That's when I finally understood what the Aurora really was. It wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was something alive, something that fed on human consciousness and emotional energy. Every time someone experienced a strong emotion during an Aurora, fear, grief, fear, love, regret, it would capture that moment and replay it forever. The dead customers weren't ghosts. They were recordings the Aurora had made of their last normal moments, and I was becoming part of it. The entity was collecting every version of me, every possible life I could have lived, and adding them to its collection. Soon, there would be Aurora nights where people would see me shopping in the store, buying the same things over and over, unaware that I was trapped in a loop, just like Mrs. Patterson and the others. I knew I had to make a choice. I could let myself be absorbed completely, scattered across infinite timelines until there was nothing left of the real Amy Rodriguez. Or I could try to anchor myself in one reality, even if it meant accepting the worst possible outcome. I chose the timeline where I died saving others. It was the hardest decision I've ever made. In this timeline, I stayed at the store and researched everything I could about the Aurora phenomenon. I found out that there were government scientists who knew about it but kept it secret. I gathered evidence, made recordings, and prepared documentation that would expose the truth. On the night of March 21st, TEK, the spring equinox, when Aurora activity is strongest, I made my choice. I knew the entity would try to absorb me completely that night. Instead of fighting it or trying to escape, I let it pull me in. But instead of letting it scatter my consciousness, I used my connection to all the timelines to create a feedback loop that disrupted its power. The process killed me. I felt my life force being drained away as the Aurora fed on my sacrifice. But my death destabilized the temporal loops. The dead customers stopped appearing. The timeline echoes collapsed. The living people who had been affected found their memories returning to normal. Most people don't remember that any of this happened, but a few do. People who worked night shifts during Aurora season. People who were sensitive to the temporal disturbances. They remember seeing the same customers over and over. They remember feeling like they were living the same night repeatedly. And they remember me. The grocery store closed down 6 months after my death. The official reason was structural problems, but really, people just felt uncomfortable there. Now it's a memorial, not officially, but in the way these things happen. People leave flowers sometimes, especially during Aurora season. I'm still there, in a way. Not as a ghost exactly, but as a kind of guardian. When the Aurora gets strong, when it starts trying to trap people in temporal loops again, I can interfere. I can't stop it completely, but I can weaken it enough that people can escape. If you work night shifts during Aurora season, anywhere in Alaska or northern Canada, pay attention to your customers. If you see the same people buying the same things night after night, if they seem to be having the exact same conversations, don't try to interact with them too much. And definitely don't let yourself get obsessed with understanding what's happening. The Aurora is always hungry. It's always looking for new consciousness to collect, new emotions to feed on. It's especially attracted to people who are isolated, people who work alone at night, people who are already feeling disconnected from time and reality. If you start seeing multiple versions of yourself, if you start having memories of things that haven't happened yet, get away from the Aurora. Move somewhere south. Take day shifts. Do whatever you have to do to break the pattern before it's too late. Because once the aurora has a piece of your consciousness, it never lets go completely. Even now, parts of me exist across multiple timelines, living every possible version of my life simultaneously. Most of the time, I can focus enough to be the guardian, the protector, but sometimes I drift between realities, experiencing all the lives I could have had. It's not the worst fate. I get to see what would have happened if I'd made different choices. I get to experience love, success, adventure, all the things I never had in my original timeline. But I also experience every failure, every tragedy, every possible way my life could have gone wrong. The aurora is still out there. It's weaker now, but not gone. And it's patient. It can wait decades or centuries for the right conditions, the right people to trap. Night shift workers are especially vulnerable because we're already living outside normal time, already isolated from the regular flow of human life. So, if you ever find yourself working alone during an aurora night, remember my story. Pay attention to patterns. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. And whatever you do, don't try to change timelines, no matter how tempting it might be. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. My name was Amy Rodriguez, and this is what happened to me during the aurora season of my last year alive. I've been guarding this place for 8 months now, protecting others from the same fate. But I don't know how much longer I can maintain this focus, this sense of individual identity. The aurora is calling to me even now, promising to show me timelines where none of this ever happened, where I'm still alive and happy. It's getting harder to resist. Someday, I might not be strong enough to stay here, to keep others safe. If that day comes, if the aurora starts trapping people again, remember that there are others like me. Other night shift workers who sacrifice themselves to protect people from temporal predators. We're scattered across the northern regions, wherever the aurora touches the earth. We're still here, still fighting, still trying to keep the darkness from spreading. But we can't do it forever. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been driving taxi in Anchorage, Alaska for 12 years. I got my commercial driver's license when I turned 21, and I've been working the night shift ever since. I've driven drunk tourists back to their hotels, picked up oil workers from the airport, and taken emergency runs to the hospital. In 12 years, I've seen it all. Or so I thought. I specialize in the late-night routes, especially during aurora season. That's when the city fills up with tourists who want to see the northern lights. They pay good money to get driven out to the best viewing spots, even if it means staying out until 3 in the morning. Most drivers hate the night shift, but I love it. The roads are empty, the radio plays good music, and the tips are usually worth the lost sleep. I drive a 2018 Ford Transit Connect, nothing fancy, but it's reliable in Alaska weather. I've got a GPS system, a two-way radio that connects me to dispatch, and a dash cam that records everything. Alaska requires all taxi drivers to have cameras now, for safety. I've also got emergency supplies in the back, blankets, water, first aid kit, and a satellite phone for when we get out of cell tower range. But what happened 3 weeks ago, during the biggest aurora storm I've ever seen, changed everything I thought I knew about this job. I picked up a passenger that night who wasn't human. And I'm not talking about someone who was just weird or drunk. I mean something that looked like a person but definitely wasn't one. Section 2, professional context, and set up October 15th started like any other night shift. I began my route at 6 p.m., working the usual spots, 9, the airport, downtown hotels, and the train station. The weather report said we were in for a big aurora storm. The space weather folks predicted a G4 magnetic storm, which meant the lights would be visible even from the city. By 10 p.m., my radio was busy with calls from tourists wanting rides to Chugach State Park or Eklutna Lake for aurora viewing. The dispatcher, Maria, was sending out location updates every hour. Jake, you copy? Tourist group at the Marriott wants a ride to Eagle River Overlook. They're paying double rate for the wait time. I loved these calls. Aurora tourists always tipped well, and most of them were excited and friendly. They'd ask questions about Alaska, take photos from the passenger seat, and tell me about their home countries. It made the long night shifts feel worthwhile. Around 11:30 p.m., I was heading back into town after dropping off a group of photographers at Arctic Valley. The sky was already starting to dance with green ribbons of light. My dash cam was recording everything. I always saved the good aurora footage to show other passengers. That's when my radio crackled with a different kind of call. Car 47, this is dispatch. We've got a pickup request from downtown. Corner of 4th and D Street. Passenger is going to. Maria paused, and I could hear papers rustling. Passenger wants to go to mile 27 on Highland Road, up in the Chugach Mountains. I grabbed my radio. Copy that, dispatch. That's pretty far up into the mountains. Did they confirm the fare? It's at least a $60 trip. Passenger said money is no problem. They're waiting at the corner now. Highland Road went deep into the Chugach Mountains. Most of it was just private driveways for expensive houses, but after mile 20, it got pretty isolated. I'd been up there a few times for rich tourists who wanted private aurora viewing spots. The road was good, but it was dark and winding. Still, $60 plus tip for one trip was too good to pass up. I turned my taxi around and headed back downtown. The aurora was getting stronger. Bright green curtains were hanging across the entire sky, with some purple edges starting to show. My radio was playing classic rock, and everything felt normal. Asterisk, asterisk. Section 3. First anomaly, asterisk, asterisk, I pulled up to the corner of 4th and D Street at 11:47 p.m. There was a person standing under the streetlight, wearing a long dark coat. From a distance, they looked completely normal. Average height, dark hair, just standing quietly and waiting. But as I got closer, something felt off. The person wasn't moving at all. Most people wave when they see their taxi coming, or at least look toward the car. This person just stood perfectly still, facing away from the street. I rolled down my window. Are you waiting for a taxi to Highland Road? The person turned around, and that's when I saw their eyes. They were silver. Not gray or light blue, actually silver, like mirrors. They reflected the streetlight in a way that human eyes just don't do. But the person smiled and nodded, so I figured maybe it was just colored contacts or some kind of medical condition. Yes, thank you for coming, they said, opening the back door. Their voice was polite but had an accent I couldn't place. It wasn't foreign exactly, just different. Like they were pronouncing English words in a way I'd never heard before. No problem. Highland Road up in the mountains, right? What's the exact address? Mile 27.3, on the left side. There will be a small access road. I started the meter and pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I glanced at my passenger. They were sitting perfectly straight, hands folded in their lap, looking out the window at the aurora. Their silver eyes reflected the green lights from the sky. Beautiful night for aurora viewing, I said, trying to make conversation. Are you visiting Alaska, or do you live here? I am returning home after a very long journey. We drove in silence for a few minutes as I headed toward the Glen Highway. The aurora was getting more intense. The whole sky was moving with green and purple light. It was one of the best displays I'd ever seen. That's when my GPS started acting up. The screen flickered, then showed our foreman, the location, as being in the middle of the Bering Sea. I tapped it a few times, and it went back to normal, showing us on the highway, heading toward the mountains. Sorry about that, I told my passenger. Sometimes the aurora activity messes with electronics. My passenger turned to look at me in the rearview mirror. Yes, it does. The electromagnetic activity is quite strong tonight. Something about the way they said it made me pay closer attention. Most tourists wouldn't know about electromagnetic activity, and their voice still had that strange accent that I couldn't identify. Then my radio started making weird noises. Instead of the classic rock station, it was picking up static mixed with sounds that almost seemed like voices, but in no language I recognized. I tried changing the station, but every frequency had the same strange static. That's weird, I muttered, turning the radio off completely. The interference will increase as we get closer to our destination, my passenger said calmly. I looked in the rearview mirror again. My passenger was still sitting in the exact same position, hands folded, looking straight ahead. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In 12 years of driving taxi, you learn to use your mirrors constantly. You watch your passengers, you watch the road behind you, you watch for cops. I know what people look like in mirrors. My passenger wasn't casting a reflection in my rearview mirror. I could see the back seat clearly. I could see the window behind them and the Aurora lights outside. But where my passenger should have been, there was just empty space. I blinked hard and looked again. My passenger was definitely sitting there. I could see them directly when I turned around. But in the mirror, the back seat looked completely empty. Section 4. Escalation. I tried to stay calm and keep driving, but my hands were starting to shake on the steering wheel. Maybe it was just a trick of the light from the Aurora, or maybe my mirrors were dirty. But I couldn't stop checking, and every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw an empty back seat. So, are you visiting for Aurora tourism? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Not exactly. I have been observing the Aurora patterns. Tonight's display will reach maximum intensity at 2:17 a.m. The activity will shift to predominantly purple and blue wavelengths, with some rare red coloration at the zenith. I glanced at my dashboard clock. It was 12:15 a.m. How could anyone predict Aurora activity that precisely? Even the space weather experts could only give general forecasts. How do you know that? I asked. I have been watching for a very long time. We turned off the Glen Highway onto the mountain roads. My GPS was acting up again. The screen kept flickering between different maps, sometimes showing roads that didn't exist, sometimes showing our location as being hundreds of miles away. As we climbed higher into the mountains, my passenger started giving me directions that didn't match what I knew about Highland Road. Turn left at the next intersection, they said. I looked ahead. There was no intersection, just a straight mountain road with trees on both sides. I don't see an intersection, I said. It will appear in approximately 30 seconds. I kept driving, watching the road carefully. And sure enough, after about 30 seconds, I saw a gap in the trees that I swear hadn't been there before. It looked like a dirt road leading deeper into the forest. Turn left here, my passenger said. Against my better judgment, I turned onto the dirt road. My headlights showed a narrow path winding through tall pine trees. The surface was smooth and well maintained, but according to my GPS, we were driving through solid forest with no roads at all. I've never seen this road before, I said. I've driven Highland Road dozens of times. This road is not on most maps. It was created for specific purposes. My radio, which I had turned off, suddenly came back on by itself. But instead of static, it was playing clear, classical music that I didn't recognize. The melody was beautiful, but somehow unsettling. I reached over to turn it off again, but my passenger spoke up. Please leave it on. The music helps with navigation. That's when I realized something else that was wrong. I had been watching my passenger in the mirror, or trying to, for the past 20 minutes. But I had never seen them breathe. Their chests never moved up and down. They never shifted position, or blinked, or did any of the small movements that people do automatically. Are you feeling okay? I asked. You've been sitting very still. I am perfectly fine. I do not require the same biological processes as humans. The way they said humans made it sound like they weren't one. I was starting to panic, but I was also deep in the mountains on a road that supposedly didn't exist, with a passenger who didn't show up in mirrors and didn't breathe. I couldn't exactly kick them out and leave them in the middle of nowhere. What do you mean by that? I asked. I mean that I am not human, Jake Morrison. I hadn't told them my name. Section 5. Climax ***. I slammed on the brakes and turned around to face my passenger directly. They were still sitting there, completely calm, with those silver eyes reflecting my headlights. How do you know my name? And what do you mean you're not human? Your name is displayed on your taxi license, which is mounted on the dashboard. As for what I am, my passenger paused and seemed to consider their words carefully. I am what you might call an extraterrestrial visitor. I have been stranded on your planet since 1989. My mind was racing. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank, or maybe a person with serious mental health issues. But the empty reflection, the dawn, perfect Aurora prediction, the road that didn't exist, none of that could be explained by mental illness. You're saying you're an alien? I said slowly. That is correct. My craft experienced mechanical failure during the Aurora storm of the 13th of March 1989. I have been waiting here for rescue ever since. 1989. That was the year of the massive geomagnetic storm that knocked out power across Canada and Alaska. I remembered my dad talking about it when I was a kid. The Aurora activity creates navigation beacons for my species. My passenger continued. Tonight's storm is the strongest since my arrival. My rescue team will be able to locate me. I started the car moving again, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. The dirt road continued winding through the forest, and the classical music on my radio was getting louder and more complex. If you're an alien, why do you look human? This is not my natural form. I can alter my appearance to blend in with local populations. However, certain features are difficult to replicate perfectly. They gestured toward their eyes. The silver coloration is a side effect of the transformation process. And that's why you don't show up in mirrors? My physical form is partially electromagnetic in nature. Standard mirrors do not reflect the full spectrum of my presence. We drove for another 10 minutes through forest that seemed to go on forever. According to the GPS, we should have reached the end of the mountain range by now, but the trees just kept going. I should mention, my passenger said, that you are not the first taxi driver I have used. Over the past 34 years, I have taken rides with many drivers in Anchorage. I have been studying human transportation systems and social interactions. A chill ran down my spine. You've been doing this for 34 years? Taking taxi rides? Yes, I have learned much about human behavior. Your species is quite fascinating. You, no more creativity, show remarkable adaptability and creativity despite your short lifespans and limited technology. I thought about all the unusual passengers I'd picked up over the years. The quiet ones who gave strange directions, who paid in cash and never said much. How many of them had been the same entity in different forms? Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because tonight is different. Tonight, I will finally be leaving your planet, and I believe you may be suitable for a larger purpose. The road ahead began to open up into a clearing. My headlights illuminated what looked like a small meadow surrounded by tall mountains. But as we got closer, I could see that the clearing wasn't natural. In the center of the meadow, partially hidden under camouflage netting and years of accumulated forest debris, was something that definitely wasn't human technology. It was roughly triangular, about the size of a small house, and it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. My ship? My passenger said simply. I stopped the car about 50 feet away from the object. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. This was real. I was looking at an actual spacecraft. Over the past 3 decades, my passenger continued, I have been evaluating humans for their potential as ambassadors to galactic civilization. Your species stands at a crucial point in your development. The choices you make in the next 50 years will determine whether you join the galactic community or remain isolated on your planet. Ambassadors? Yes. My species has been monitoring many developing worlds. When a species reaches certain technological and social milestones, we make contact. However, that contact must be carefully managed to prevent cultural shock or conflict. The aurora overhead was now incredibly intense. The entire sky was moving with ribbons of green, purple, and red light. But as I watched, I realized the patterns weren't random. They seemed to be forming geometric shapes, almost like signals. The aurora activity you see is not entirely natural, my passenger explained. It is partially generated by our navigation systems. When our ships approach a planet, they create electromagnetic disturbances that interact with the planet's magnetic field. I watched as the lights in the sky formed what looked like a complex diagram, then shifted into different patterns. Tonight, my rescue ship will arrive. But before I leave, I need to make a choice about Earth's future. Your species has impressed me with its resilience and creativity. However, you also show concerning tendencies toward violence and environmental destruction. My passenger opened the car door and stepped out. As soon as they left the vehicle, my radio and GPS immediately returned to normal. The classical music stopped, and I could hear the familiar voices of the dispatch channel. Jake Morrison, my passenger said, standing beside my open window. You have shown the qualities we look for in potential ambassadors. You remained calm under extraordinary circumstances. You listened before reacting. You chose to help rather than flee. What are you asking me to do? I am offering you a choice. You can come with me tonight and serve as Earth's first ambassador to galactic civilization. You will see wonders beyond your imagination and help prepare humanity for eventual contact. Or you can return to your life in Anchorage with the knowledge that your world is part of something much larger. I looked at the spacecraft, then back at my passenger. Their silver eyes were reflecting the aurora light, and for just a moment, I could see past the human disguise. There was something vast and ancient behind those eyes, something that had traveled between stars. And if I stay, then your life continues as before, but you will carry the knowledge that humanity is being watched and evaluated. In time, others will be contacted. The process will continue until we determine whether your species is ready for the next stage of development. Section 6. Resolution and Aftermath. I sat in my taxi for a long time, listening to the hum of the engine and watching the impossible light show overhead. The choice my passenger was offering felt too big for one person to make. "I need to stay," I finally said. "My life is here. My family, my work, everything I know is here. But, will I see you again?" My passenger smiled, the first genuine emotion I had seen from them all night. "Perhaps. And you should know that this conversation has been more helpful than you realize. I will be reporting to my superiors that humanity shows great promise." They walked toward their spacecraft, and as they got closer, the camouflage netting seemed to dissolve away. The ship became visible in its full form, sleek, angular, and covered in lights that pulsed in rhythm with the aurora. A section of the ship opened silently, revealing a softly lit interior. My passenger turned back toward me one last time. "Jake Morrison, continue doing the work you do. Be kind to your passengers, pay attention to the unusual ones. And if you ever see silver eyes again, remember that you are not alone in this universe." They disappeared into their ship. A few seconds later, the entire craft rose silently into the air and blended seamlessly with the aurora lights. Within moments, it was impossible to tell where the ship ended and the natural light display began. I sat there for another hour, watching the sky. Eventually, the aurora began to fade, and I realized I needed to get back to town. When I started driving, I found myself on a perfectly normal Forest Service road that led directly back to Highland Road. According to my GPS, I had never left the main highway. When I got back to Anchorage, I tried to explain to dispatch why I had been out of radio contact for 3 hours. Maria just assumed I had taken the tourist somewhere remote and lost signal. My dash cam showed the entire conversation with my passenger, but when I tried to show it to other drivers, the footage looked like me talking to an empty back seat. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm still driving taxi in Anchorage, still working the night shift during Aurora season. But everything is different now. I pay closer attention to my passengers, especially the quiet ones who give unusual directions. I've started noticing things I missed before. People who sit too still, who know things they shouldn't know, who seem to be studying human behavior rather than just getting a ride. Last week, I picked up a passenger at the airport who wanted to go to a research station north of town. They had silver eyes and spoke with that same strange accent. When I asked if they were visiting for Aurora research, they said they were continuing the monitoring project. I think there are more of them here than just the one I met. I think they've been here for a long time, watching and learning and deciding whether humanity is ready for what comes next. I still have that modified taxi. Sometimes, on very clear nights when the aurora is active, my radio picks up that classical music again. And sometimes, just for a moment, my GPS shows roads that don't exist on any map. I know now that my job isn't just driving people around the city. I'm part of something bigger, something that connects Earth to the rest of the universe. Every passenger might be a test, every trip might be an evaluation. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Because I've seen what's waiting for us out there among the stars, and it's more wonderful than anything I could have imagined. We just have to prove we're ready for it. So if you're ever in Anchorage and you need a taxi late at night during Aurora season, call Car 47. I'll pick you up, no matter where you need to go or how unusual your destination might be. Because you never know who might be along for the ride. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been running my own coffee shop in Nome, Alaska for 12 years. I bought the Northern Grind when I was 26, right after finishing my business degree. Everyone said I was crazy to open a coffee shop in a town of less than 4,000 people, but I knew the night shift workers at the port, the hospital, and the airport needed somewhere warm to grab a decent cup of coffee. I've served through some of the harshest winters on Earth. I've stayed open during blizzards when the power lines were down, running on my backup generator. I've dealt with drunk fishermen, homesick tourists, and lonely truckers who just needed someone to talk to. My little shop sits right on Front Street, facing the Bering Sea, and I've always been proud that my windows stayed lit when everything else was dark. But what happened during Aurora season last year changed everything I thought I knew about my customers, my town, and what comes down from the sky when those green lights start dancing. I learned that some visitors aren't from around here at all. Section 2. Professional context and setup. The Northern Grind isn't much to look at from the outside. It's a small wooden building painted blue, wedged between the post office and a gift shop that's only open during tourist season. Inside, I've got 12 tables, a counter with 8 stools, and the best espresso machine in northwestern Alaska. The walls are covered with photos of the northern lights taken by locals over the years. My customers love those pictures. I open at 5 in the morning and usually close at 10 at night, but during Aurora season, September through March, I stay open until midnight. That's when the night shift workers get their breaks, and it's also when the Aurora watchers come in to warm up between viewing sessions. Aurora season is my busiest time of year, and the extra hours help me survive the lean summer months when half the town disappears. My setup is simple, but efficient. I've got a commercial coffee machine, a small kitchen for sandwiches and pastries, and a cash register that's older than most of my customers. I installed security cameras 3 years ago after some break-ins around town. 2 cameras cover the main floor, 1 watches the back door, and 1 points at the register. The footage goes to a small recorder in my office behind the counter. It was October 15th when everything started. I remember the date exactly because it was the first really good Aurora night of the season. The forecast called for strong geomagnetic activity, which meant the lights would be bright and low on the horizon. By 9 o'clock, I had 15 people crammed into my little shop, all excited about getting their first good Aurora photos of the year. The weather was perfect, clear skies, no wind, and cold enough that breath steamed, but not so cold that cameras would freeze up. I was busy making hot chocolates and coffee refills for people heading back outside when I noticed most of my Aurora watching customers looked uncomfortable. They kept glancing toward the corner table by the window, even though nobody was sitting there. That's when I realized I was about to meet my strangest regular customer. Section 3. First anomaly. At exactly 10 minutes before midnight, the door chimed and someone walked in. I was wiping down the counter and didn't look up right away, but I heard several of my customers suddenly go quiet. When I raised my head, I saw a person standing by the door, wearing a dark coat and knit hat pulled low. The customer walked to the counter with an odd, careful gait, like someone learning to use new legs. Up close, I could see they were tall and thin, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed too large for their face. When they spoke, their voice was soft and precise. "1 coffee, black, and 1 of your blueberry muffins, please." I poured the coffee and wrapped up a muffin, trying not to stare. Something about this person felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Their proportions seemed slightly off. Arms a little too long, fingers a little too thin, head tilted at an angle that looked uncomfortable. They paid with exact change, counting out bills and coins slowly. The money looked normal at first glance, but when I picked up the coins later, I noticed they felt different. The edges were too sharp, and the symbols on them weren't quite right. They looked like quarters and dimes, but the eagles and faces were just a little bit wrong, like someone had tried to copy them from memory. The customer took their coffee and muffin to the corner table by the window, the same table my Aurora watchers had been staring at. They sat down carefully, arranged their food precisely, and pulled out a small notebook. For the next hour, they sat completely still, occasionally writing something down, but never eating or drinking. I was busy cleaning up and getting ready to close, but I kept watching them in my peripheral vision. Every few minutes, they would look up from their notebook and stare out the window at the Aurora display. The lights were incredible that night, bright green curtains dancing across the entire sky. What really bothered me was how my other customers reacted. The Aurora watchers, who had been chatty and excited all evening, became quiet and tense. They finished their drinks quickly and left without their usual lingering conversations about the lights. By 11:30, everyone except the strange customer had gone. At exactly midnight, the customer stood up, left their untouched food and coffee on the table, and walked out without saying a word. I found a $10 bill on the table, more than enough to cover their order. I didn't think much of it until the next night, when the exact same thing happened again. Section 4. Escalating investigation. For the next week, the pattern repeated every single night. At 10 minutes before midnight, the same customer would arrive, order the same items, sit at the same table, and leave at midnight without touching their food. They always paid with those slightly wrong coins and bills, and they always left a $10 tip. I started paying closer attention to them, trying to figure out what was so unsettling. Their movements were too precise, like they were thinking about each step before taking it. They never blinked as often as normal people, and their breathing seemed too shallow. Most importantly, they never seemed affected by the cold, even though everyone else who came in was shivering and grateful for the warmth. On the 8th night, I decided to check my security cameras. I figured I could get a better look at this customer's face and maybe figure out who they were. Nome isn't that big, I know most of the locals, and I can usually spot tourists pretty easily. That's when I discovered something impossible. The cameras showed me sitting at the counter, showed other customers coming and going, showed me serving coffee and cleaning tables, but they never showed the strange customer at all. The corner table appeared empty in the footage, even though I clearly remembered serving them and watching them sit there. I thought the cameras were malfunctioning, so I tested them the next day. They worked perfectly fine. I could see myself moving around the shop, see customers at every table, see cars passing by outside the window. But when I reviewed that night's footage, once again, the corner table looked empty during the customer's visit. That night, I decided to be more direct. When the customer arrived at their usual time, I was ready. "Excuse me," I said as they approached the counter. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Sarah, the owner. I've noticed you've been coming in every night this week." They looked at me with those two large eyes for a long moment before responding. "I am observing," they said simply. "Observing what?" "The patterns, the interactions, the responses to the displays." They gestured toward the window, where the Aurora was putting on another spectacular show. Green and blue lights twisted across the sky, in formations that seemed almost too perfect, too organized. "Are you a scientist?" I asked. "Studying the northern lights?" "In a manner of speaking," they replied. Then they ordered their usual coffee and muffin and went to their table. I spent that night watching them more carefully than ever. They would look out the window for several minutes, then write something in their notebook, then look around the shop at the few remaining customers. When they wrote, their hand moved in quick, precise strokes, but the language didn't look like anything I recognized. The letters seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. Section 5. Professional Crisis and Revelation. After 2 weeks of this routine, I was starting to lose sleep. My regular customers were avoiding the shop during Aurora displays, and my business was suffering. People would come in, see the corner table, and suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be. Word was getting around town that something weird was happening at the Northern Grind. I decided I needed answers. On the night of October 30th, when the Aurora forecast called for the strongest geomagnetic storm of the season, I prepared to confront my mysterious customer directly. They arrived at their usual time, but something was different. The aurora outside was brighter and more active than I'd ever seen it. The lights were dancing so intensely that they cast moving shadows inside the shop, and my customer seemed more alert, more focused. After they sat down with their untouched order, I walked over to their table. "I need to ask you something," I said, sitting down across from them. "Why don't you show up on my security cameras?" They looked at me for a long time without blinking. Then, they closed their notebook and folded their hands on the table. "You have been very observant, Sarah Chen." The fact that they knew my full name, even though I'd only told them my first name, sent a chill down my spine. "The devices you use to record images cannot detect me because I exist partially outside the spectrum of light you are accustomed to," they continued, "much like your aurora displays." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, they opened their notebook and turned it toward me. The page was covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly, but between the lines, I could see drawings. Pictures of my coffee shop, but drawn from impossible angles. Images of my customers, but with notes written beside them in that shifting language. And scattered throughout, pictures of the aurora that showed details I'd never noticed, patterns within patterns, structures within the chaos. The light displays you call aurora are not what your scientists believe them to be, they said softly. They are a scanning process, a way of reading the electromagnetic patterns of consciousness from a distance. Scanning for what? Evaluation. Your species is being assessed for its readiness to join a larger community of consciousness. The scanning has been ongoing for approximately 300 of your years, coinciding with what you call the Little Ice Age and the increased frequency of aurora displays. I stared at them, trying to process what they were saying. You're telling me the northern lights are some kind of alien technology? Not alien, cosmic, universal. The process is overseen by intelligences that exist on scales your language cannot properly describe. I am merely a local observer, assigned to gather specific data about human social structures and individual psychology. They turned a page in their notebook, revealing more drawings. These showed other coffee shops, other small businesses, other people serving customers, all drawn with the same impossible precision. Establishments like yours provide ideal observation points. They are social gathering places where humans interact naturally, without the performance behaviors they exhibit in formal settings. Your treatment of customers, their treatment of each other, the small kindnesses and cruelties that emerge in everyday interactions, these reveal the true character of your species. And what have you concluded? They were quiet for a long moment, looking out at the dancing lights. That is still being determined. Your species shows both remarkable potential and troubling limitations. You are capable of great compassion, as you have demonstrated in your care for your customers. But you are also capable of great destruction, as your history clearly shows. What happens if we fail this evaluation? They turned another page, and suddenly I was looking at images that made my stomach turn. Pictures of dead worlds, barren planets where cities once stood. Civilizations that had been reduced to empty shells, their resources harvested, their populations gone. Species that prove themselves unwilling or unable to transcend their primitive impulses are quarantined and left to develop in isolation. Those that actively threaten the cosmic order are managed more directly. And if we pass? The next page showed something beautiful and terrifying. Vast structures in space, impossible technologies, beings of pure thought communicating across galaxies. Integration into the universal community, access to knowledge and capabilities that would transform your species beyond recognition. Section 6. Resolution and Aftermath. I sat there in my little coffee shop, looking at images of cosmic civilizations while the aurora danced outside my window and tried to understand what I was being told. This strange customer, this cosmic observer, had been using my business as a testing ground for humanity's future. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Because you have already passed your portion of the evaluation, Sarah Chen. Your consistent kindness to difficult customers, your willingness to stay open during harsh weather, to serve those who need warmth and shelter, your treatment of strangers with dignity, regardless of their ability to pay. These behaviors indicate the kind of consciousness that could thrive in a cosmic community. But you said, the evaluation is still full, ongoing. Yes, there are others like me, in coffee shops and restaurants and gathering places around your world, conducting similar observations. The final determination will be made based on the collective data we gather. They closed the notebook and stood up. I will not be returning, Sarah Chen. My observations are complete. Your establishment will no longer serve as a testing site. What should I do with this information? Continue being who you are. Treat your customers with kindness. Create a space where people feel welcome and safe. These simple acts of humanity are more powerful than you realize. They walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. The aurora displays will continue, but they will no longer be scanning your location. When you see them now, remember that you are being watched by intelligences that span the cosmos. Take comfort in knowing that at least one human has proven worthy of their attention. And then, they were gone. That was 4 months ago. I never saw my strange customer again, and my security cameras have been working normally ever since. My regular customers came back gradually, though many of them still avoid the corner table by the window. I still open late during Aurora season, and I still serve anyone who comes through my door. But now when I look out at those dancing lights, I wonder what they're really seeing when they look back at me. I wonder if humanity will pass its cosmic evaluation, or if we'll be left alone to figure things out on our own. Either way, I'll keep serving coffee and treating my customers with kindness. Because apparently, that's exactly what the universe is watching for. And sometimes, on the brightest aurora nights, I swear I can feel something vast and ancient taking note of every small act of compassion that happens in my little coffee shop on the edge of the world. My name is Maria Soto, and I've been a school bus driver in rural Alaska for 12 years. I got my commercial driver's license when my husband died in a fishing accident, and driving the kids to school became my way to keep going. I've handled everything this job can throw at you. Blizzards that turn the roads white, moose blocking the highway, and buses breaking down in 40 below weather. I've even dealt with kids fighting, parents yelling, and mechanical problems that would make a grown man cry. But what happened last winter on Route 47 changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in these Alaskan woods. Let me tell you something about driving a school bus in Alaska. It's not like anywhere else in the world. My route covers 43 miles of winding mountain roads through the Chugach National Forest. I pick up 26 kids from 5 different stops, some of them living so far out that their driveways are half a mile long. My bus is a 2019 Bluebird Vision with a diesel heater that barely works, security cameras inside and out, and enough emergency equipment to survive a week in the wilderness. I start my route every morning at 6:15 a.m. when it's still dark. In winter, the sun doesn't come up until almost 10 a.m., so most of my driving happens in complete darkness. The roads are narrow, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles, with steep drops on one side and thick forest on the other. There's no cell phone service for most of the route. The radio works, but sometimes static makes it hard to reach dispatch. My first stop is the Henderson farm, where I pick up their 3 kids. Then I drive 8 miles to the old mining camp where the Torres family lives. After that, it's another 12 miles to the cluster of cabins where most of my kids wait. The 4th stop is 15 miles deeper into the forest, and the last pickup is at the very end of the road, where the Nakamura family built their house next to a frozen lake. The kids are good kids. They know the rules. Stay in your seat, no yelling, and always listen to Mrs. Maria. Some of them have been riding my bus since kindergarten, and now they're in high school. I know their families, their pets, their favorite subjects in school. When you're responsible for getting children safely through some of the most dangerous terrain in America, you take that job seriously. Everything was normal until the Aurora started acting strange in November. We get northern lights here all the time, but these were different. They were brighter, more active, and they seemed to happen every few nights instead of just occasionally. The local news said it was because of solar storm activity. Something about magnetic fields and electromagnetic pulses. All I knew was that on Aurora nights, my bus radio would crackle with static, and sometimes the heater would cut out for no reason. That's when I started finding the footprints. The first ones appeared after a particularly bright Aurora display on November 15th. I was doing my pre-trip inspection, walking around the bus with my flashlight like I do every morning, checking tires and mirrors, and making sure no animals had gotten underneath during the night. That's when I saw them in the snow next to my front bumper. They looked like human footprints, but wrong, way too big. I wear a size 8 boot, and these prints were more than twice as long as my foot. I'm talking about 18 inches from heel to toe. But the really strange thing was the shape. They looked like feet, but they had 6 toes instead of 5, and each toe ended in what looked like a claw mark pressed deep into the frozen ground. I figured it was probably just a bear print that got distorted when the snow melted and refroze. Bears will walk on their hind legs sometimes, and their paws can look almost human. I took a picture with my phone and went about my route. But the prints kept appearing, always after Aurora nights, always near my bus stops. And they were always fresh, like whatever made them had been there just hours before I arrived. I mentioned it to Tom Nakamura when I picked up his daughter Katie at the last stop. Tom's lived in Alaska his whole life, and he knows the wildlife better than anyone. He looked at the photo on my phone and got quiet for a long time. "Mrs. Maria," he said finally, "You should talk to Elder Joseph in the village. Show him this picture." Elder Joseph Kanguk was in his 80s, one of the few people left who still remembered the old stories from before the missionaries came. He lived in a small cabin near the village center, and when I showed him the photo, his face went pale. "Tornarsuk," he whispered. "The giant ones. They hunt when the sky fires dance." He told me that his grandmother used to tell stories about creatures that looked like huge people, but weren't human at all. They lived deep in the wilderness, and usually stayed hidden, but during heavy aurora activity, they would come out to hunt. According to the old stories, they were intelligent, much smarter than bears or wolves, and they had a taste for human flesh. I wanted to believe it was just a story, something to scare kids into staying close to home. But then my bus cameras caught something that made my blood run cold. It happened on November 28th, during my afternoon run, taking the kids home. I was driving through the thickest part of the forest, about 5 miles from the Torres stop, when something on my right side monitor caught my eye. There was movement in the trees, something big keeping pace with the bus. I was doing about 45 miles per hour, which is pretty fast for those winding forest roads. Whatever was in the trees was moving at the same speed, weaving between the tree trunks like it was running on a clear path. I could only catch glimpses of it on the camera, something tall and dark and definitely walking on 2 legs. I didn't say anything to the kids, no point in scaring them. But when I got back to the depot that night, I pulled the camera footage and watched it over and over again. The thing in the trees was huge, at least 12 feet tall, with arms and legs that seemed too long for its body. It was covered in dark, matted fur, and it moved with a strange, loping gait that covered ground incredibly fast. For almost 2 minutes of footage, it kept perfect pace with my bus through dense forest terrain. No bear could do that. No human could do that. Whatever this thing was, it was something else entirely. The kids started noticing things too. Sarah Henderson, one of my high schoolers, mentioned that she'd been seeing glowing red eyes watching them from the forest during morning pickup. At first, I thought she was just trying to spook the younger kids, but then other children started saying the same thing. "Mrs. Maria," little Tommy Torres asked me one morning, "Why is there something big watching us from the trees?" I started paying closer attention during my stops, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. Sometimes I thought I saw a reflection of eyes, but it could have been anything: a raccoon, a fox, even ice crystals catching the light. Then I found the moose. It was December 3rd, a Tuesday morning after another heavy aurora display. I was approaching my 3rd stop when I had to slam on the brakes. There was something hanging from a tree branch right over the road, about 20 feet up. It took me a minute to understand what I was looking at. It was a full-grown moose, probably weighing 800 pounds, suspended from the thick branch of an old pine tree. The carcass was completely drained of blood, hanging there like a grotesque ornament. Whatever had done this was strong enough to lift a moose 20 feet into the air, and powerful enough to drain every drop of blood from its body. I called it in to the Alaska State Troopers, and they came out with a wildlife expert from Fish and Game. The official report said it was probably the work of a brown bear with unusual behavior, possibly caused by climate change affecting their normal hibernation patterns. But I saw the look in the wildlife expert's eyes when he examined the carcass. He'd never seen anything like it either. That's when the gifts started appearing. I call them gifts, but they felt more like threats. Every few days, I'd find arrangements of animal bones at my bus stops. Small bones from rabbits and squirrels, arranged in patterns that spelled out numbers. Always the same numbers, 4 and 7. My route number. The bones were always clean and white, like they'd been picked clean and bleached. They were arranged carefully, deliberately, like someone was trying to send me a message. But the really disturbing part was how precisely they were placed. Whatever was doing this knew my exact schedule, knew exactly where I stopped, and was tracking my movements. I started carrying a camera with me and documenting everything. Pictures of the bone arrangements, the footprints, anything unusual I found along my route. I was building a file, trying to make sense of what was happening. The breakthrough came when I checked the security footage from the depot. Our buses are parked in a fenced lot with motion-activated cameras, and I had access to review the footage as part of my safety certification. What I found made me seriously consider quitting my job. The cameras had captured something examining my bus at night. It happened on December 10th, around 2 a.m. The motion sensors triggered the recording, and there it was, A massive bipedal figure, at least 12 feet tall, moving around my bus with obvious intelligence. It tested the doors, pulling on the handles and pushing against the emergency exits. It examined the windows, running what looked like clawed fingers along the glass. It even looked directly into the cameras, and for a few seconds, I could see its face clearly. It was humanoid, but wrong in every way that mattered. The features were too large, too angular. The mouth was filled with teeth that were clearly meant for tearing flesh, but the eyes were the worst part, completely black, like looking into deep water at night, but with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware. This thing wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. It was planning something. The next morning, I found that several trees had fallen across the road at different points along my route. Not storm damage, these trees had been deliberately toppled to block the road. Each one was positioned at a narrow point where it would be difficult to turn around, forcing me to take specific detours. I realized it was hurting me, like a predator driving prey toward a specific location. But where and why? I started carrying emergency supplies in my bus, extra food, water, blankets, and a satellite phone that would work even without cell towers. I also started varying my route slightly, taking different roads when possible, trying to be unpredictable. That's when I discovered the cave paintings. I was taking a detour around another fallen tree when I noticed a rock formation I'd never seen before, about half a mile off the main road. There was a small cave entrance, and something about it drew my attention. I parked the bus and took a few minutes to investigate with my flashlight. The cave was shallow, but the walls were covered with paintings. Old ones, probably done with natural pigments from berries and clay. They showed figures hunting humans during what were clearly aurora displays. The sky in the paintings was filled with wavy lines representing the northern lights, and below them, giant humanoid figures were chasing smaller human figures. The really disturbing part was that the paintings seemed to be a record. They showed the creatures getting larger and more aggressive with each aurora cycle, like the electromagnetic activity was affecting them somehow. The later paintings showed the giants working together in organized groups, using tools and setting traps. I took pictures of everything and did some research when I got home. Aurora activity in Alaska has been increasing over the past few decades due to changes in the Earth's magnetic field. If these creatures were somehow connected to electromagnetic activity, they might be becoming more active and aggressive. I found historical records of missing persons in the area going back to the 1950 seconds. Children, mostly, who vanished from remote locations during heavy aurora activity. The official explanations were always bears, wolves, or accidents in the wilderness. But reading through the old newspaper reports, I found a pattern. Several witnesses described seeing a giant hairy man taking children into the forest. The descriptions were remarkably consistent across different time periods and different families. Something large, humanoid, covered in dark fur, with unusual intelligence and the ability to move silently through dense forest. Then things escalated. On December 18th, I was picking up the kids at my fourth stop when I heard something that made my heart stop. A voice calling from the trees, clear as day. "Katie, Katie, come here." It was Tom Nakamura's voice, calling for his daughter. But Tom was at work at the cannery 40 miles away. I knew because Katie had mentioned that morning that her dad was working a double shift. "Stay on the bus," I told the kids, and I honked my horn in the pattern we used to signal all clear. The voice stopped immediately. Katie looked confused. "That sounded like my dad," she said. "Your dad's at work, honey. Stay in your seat." But over the next few days, it happened again and again. I'd hear the voices of parents calling their children from the forest. Perfect imitations, down to the accent and speech patterns. But I knew it wasn't really the parents, because I could see their work, schedules, knew where they were supposed to be. The worst was when I heard my own voice. I was at the Henderson farm, waiting for the 3 kids to board, when I heard myself calling from the tree line. "Kids, come quick, Mrs. Maria needs help with the bus." The voice was perfect. It sounded exactly like me, same tone, same pronunciation, even the slight accent I have from growing up in California. If I hadn't been sitting in the driver's seat, I would have believed it was really me calling. The kids started to get up, but I stopped them. "Nobody moves," I said. "That's not me, I'm right here." Young Jimmy Henderson looked confused. "But Mrs. Maria, you're calling us." "Look at me, Jimmy. I'm sitting right here." I'm not outside calling anyone." The fake voice called again, more urgently this time. "Please hurry, the bus is broken." I started the engine and put the bus in gear. "Everyone sit down and buckle up. We're leaving right now." As we drove away, I could hear my own voice following us through the trees, calling the children's names, begging them to come help. It was the most disturbing thing I'd ever experienced. That night, I found something on my windshield that nearly made me quit on the spot. A small backpack, faded and torn, with a name tag that read, Melissa Torres, 1987. I knew that name from the missing person reports I'd researched. Melissa Torres was one of the children who had disappeared 36 years ago. Inside the backpack were a few school supplies, a small toy, and a note in a child's handwriting. The hairy man took me to his house in the rocks. He has lots of friends. They're hungry. I called the state troopers again, but there wasn't much they could do with evidence that old. They took the backpack and filed a report, but I could tell they thought I was either making things up or being pranked by local teenagers. The bone arrangements became more elaborate. Instead of just spelling out my route number, they started forming patterns that looked like maps. Arrows pointing toward the deep forest, circles marking specific locations, lines that seemed to trace the path of my daily route. Whatever this thing was, it had been watching me for weeks. It knew my schedule down to the minute, knew where I stopped, how long I waited at each pickup point. It was studying me like a scientist studies a lab rat. On December 22nd, the winter solstice, we had the strongest aurora display in decades. The entire sky was lit up with green and purple curtains of light, dancing and pulsing like something alive. The electromagnetic interference was so strong that my bus radio was completely dead, and even my dashboard lights were flickering. That's when it attacked. I was at my last stop, waiting for Katie Nakamura, when something massive struck the roof of my bus. The entire vehicle shook like we'd been hit by a falling tree. The kids started screaming, and I could hear the sound of metal being torn and twisted above our heads. Through the windshield, I could see it clearly for the first time. 12 feet tall at least, covered in dark, matted fur, with arms that reached almost to the ground. Its face was a nightmare version of human features, too large, too angular, with a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. But the eyes were the worst part. Completely black, like staring into an abyss, but with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware. This thing was looking at me, evaluating me, deciding what to do next. It grabbed the back of the bus and lifted. The rear wheels came off the ground, and I could feel the whole vehicle tilting forward. The kids were screaming and crying, and I knew I had seconds to act before this thing flipped us over or tore the roof completely off. I hit the emergency door release and started evacuating the kids through the front exit. "Everyone out, now, run toward the road." The creature was systematically tearing the bus apart, section by section, like it was opening a can to get at the contents inside. It ripped away chunks of the roof, pulled off the rear emergency exit, and started working its way forward. I got all the kids out and started leading them through the forest toward the main road. The creature followed us, but it was having trouble moving quickly through the deep snow and thick undergrowth. Its size worked against it in the dense forest. We made it to the road, where another bus driver found us and called for help. By the time the authorities arrived, the creature was gone, but my bus looked like it had been attacked by a wrecking ball. The official report blamed the damage on a brown bear with unusual aggressive behavior, possibly caused by the electromagnetic interference from the aurora. But I knew better. I'd seen what did it, and it wasn't any kind of bear. I took some time off after that, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd experienced. I did more research, talked to Elder Joseph again, and reached out to other drivers who worked remote routes in Alaska. I wasn't the only one. There were other reports, going back decades, of encounters with large, intelligent creatures in the wilderness. Different tribes had different names for them, but the descriptions were always similar. The Inupiaq called them Tornarsuk, the Yup'ik called them Palraijit, but they were talking about the same species. Elder Joseph provided me with traditional protective symbols and taught me some of the old hunting techniques his grandfather had used. According to the stories, these creatures were vulnerable to certain electromagnetic frequencies, the same kinds of energy that powered the aurora displays. I returned to work in January, but I made some modifications to my bus. I installed additional emergency exits, better communication equipment, and some devices that Elder Joseph said would help protect against the creatures. I also started carrying traditional weapons, not guns, which might not be effective, but things like blessed spear points and ceremonial knives. The encounters continued, but I was better prepared. The creatures seemed to be adapting too, working in groups and using more sophisticated hunting strategies. But I had advantages they didn't expect: knowledge from the elders, modern technology, and most importantly, the trust of the children I was protecting. My route is different now. I take additional precautions during Aurora activity, vary my schedule when possible, and always travel with backup communication equipment. The school district has upgraded security at all the remote stops, and we've implemented new protocols for extreme weather and wildlife encounters. But I know they're still out there. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in the trees or find fresh tracks after particularly active Aurora nights. The difference is that now I'm ready for them. I've been driving school bus Route 47 for 12 years, and I plan to keep driving it for 12 more. These kids depend on me to get them safely to school and back home again. Whatever's living in those woods, whatever they want, they're not going to get past me. The northern lights still dance across the Alaskan sky, and when they do, I know the Tornersuk are watching and waiting. But I'm watching too, and I'm not going anywhere. Some people think I should transfer to a safer route, maybe something in town where there's more traffic and cell phone coverage. But these kids are my kids, and this is my responsibility. I've learned things about survival in the Alaska wilderness that they don't teach in any training manual. The creatures are real. They're intelligent, they're dangerous, and they're still out there. But they've learned that school bus drivers are tougher than they look, and some fights aren't worth picking. My name is Maria Soto, and I drive Route 47 through the Chugach National Forest. If you're ever driving through rural Alaska during Aurora season, keep your doors locked, stay on the main roads, and remember that sometimes the old stories are true. The wilderness is vast, and we're not alone out here. My name is Kevin Martinez, and I've been a night janitor for 12 years. I started cleaning office buildings in Anchorage right after high school, worked my way up through hotels and shopping centers, and for the past 5 years, I've been working at Fairbanks Community Hospital. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and I take pride in keeping places clean and safe for people who need them most. I've seen every kind of mess you can imagine: being, blood, vomit, things that would make most people sick. I've cleaned up after accidents, after violence, after death itself. But what happened during the Aurora season last winter changed everything I thought I knew about my job, about this hospital, and about what kinds of things can live inside the human body. I should have paid more attention to the patterns. Should have asked more questions when things started getting weird. But when you're working alone in a hospital at 3 in the morning, you learn to mind your own business and just focus on getting the job done. That mindset almost got me killed, and it might have cost humanity its future. Fairbanks Community Hospital is a 200-bed facility that serves the interior region of Alaska. During winter months, we get a steady stream of patients, frostbite cases, carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty heaters, car accidents on icy roads, and the usual medical emergencies that don't stop just because it's 40 below outside. My shift runs from midnight to 8 a.m., which means I'm there for the quietest hours when most of the hospital is sleeping. The building itself is laid out in 3 wings connected by a central hub. Emergency department is on the east side, surgical suites and recovery on the west, and patient rooms fill the north wing. The basement houses the morgue, storage, and maintenance areas where I keep my equipment. I've got a master key card that gets me into every room except the medication lockups and a few restricted areas in the basement that even the day shift maintenance guys don't go into. My routine is pretty standard. I start with the emergency department, since that's where the worst messes happen, then work my way through patient floors, common areas, and finish with the surgical wing. I use a cart with industrial disinfectants, floor cleaners, and specialized equipment for handling biological waste. Everything has to be documented: which rooms I cleaned, what chemicals I used, any incidents or damage I find. The hospital takes infection control seriously, especially during flu season. It was January 15th when I first noticed something unusual. We were in the middle of Aurora season, which runs from late fall through early spring when the northern lights are most active. That night was particularly spectacular. Green and blue sheets dancing across the sky, visible even through the hospital's tinted windows. I remember thinking how beautiful it looked while I was cleaning the pediatric ward around 2 a.m. But what caught my attention wasn't the lights themselves. It was the admission pattern I started noticing on the intake sheets. Every time we had a strong aurora display, we'd get a spike in patients coming in the next day or two. Not unusual by itself. People go out to watch the lights, get cold, sometimes get hurt. But these patients all had similar symptoms that didn't quite match hypothermia or frostbite. The intake notes described unusual skin irritation, elevated energy levels, and increased appetite. The attending physicians seemed confused by the combination. Patients would come in complaining of itchy, moving sensations under their skin, but physical exams showed no obvious cause. Blood work came back normal. Skin biopsies showed minor inflammation, but nothing that explained the symptoms. What really got my attention was overhearing Dr. Reeves, one of the senior physicians, talking to a colleague about how these patients seemed almost too healthy despite their complaints. Their reflexes were faster than normal, their healing rates accelerated, their pain tolerance unusually high. She mentioned that several had been discharged only to return a few days later with more severe symptoms. 3 weeks into Aurora season, I was doing my usual rounds in the medical wing when I noticed something that made me stop and stare. I was cleaning room 314, where they'd discharged a patient earlier that day, a guy in his 30s who'd come in after watching the aurora from his backyard. According to his chart, he'd complained about something crawling under his skin. On the bathroom floor, I found what looked like tiny pieces of shed skin, but they were moving. Not just curling from moisture or air currents, it's not actually moving, like they were alive. I got down on my hands and knees with my flashlight and watched these microscopic fragments pulse and shift across the tile. When I tried to pick one up with tweezers, it seemed to dissolve or burrow into my cleaning cloth. I thought maybe I was seeing things. Working nights for years can mess with your head, make you imagine movement in shadows. But I bagged the cloth and made a note in my incident report. The next morning, I asked Janet in day shift housekeeping if she'd ever seen anything like it. She gave me a strange look and said patients in those rooms always left behind weird residue that was hard to clean up. That same week, I started paying closer attention to the patients themselves during my rounds. Most were sleeping, but a few were awake, and their behavior was odd. They moved differently, more fluid, more alert. Their eyes tracked me as I cleaned, following my movements with an intensity that made my skin crawl. One elderly woman in room 318 asked me what time the aurora would be strongest that night. When I told her I didn't know, she smiled and said she could feel it coming. The next night, I decided to check the security footage from the previous evening. I had access to the monitoring station in the basement for safety reasons. Protocol required someone to know where I was working in case of emergency. The cameras in room 318 showed that elderly woman getting out of bed at exactly 2:47 a.m. and standing at the window. But the way she moved wasn't right. She didn't shuffle or use the bed rails like most elderly patients. She moved like a much younger person, smooth and confident. But that wasn't the strangest part. On the footage, I could see her pressing her palms against the window glass, and the glass was fogging up not from her breath, but from her hands. Like her skin was generating heat or moisture that regular human skin doesn't produce. She stood there for almost an hour, completely still, just watching the sky. I started keeping a log of which patients exhibited unusual behavior and cross-referencing it with aurora activity reports. The pattern was undeniable. Strong aurora nights correlated with admissions of patients displaying these symptoms. But more disturbing was what happened to patients who'd been there for several days. Their medical charts showed impossible improvements. Broken bones healing faster than normal, chronic conditions stabilizing. But their behavior was becoming increasingly strange. They stopped complaining about pain, even from serious injuries. They requested raw meat from the kitchen instead of cooked meals. Several had been found wandering the halls at night, claiming they were looking for others. The nursing staff was starting to talk. I heard whispers about patients who seemed to know things they shouldn't know, like which nurses were working, which shifts, or details about other patients they'd never met. One nurse mentioned that several patients had asked specifically about me, wanting to know my schedule and which floors I cleaned. That's when I realized these patients weren't just sick. They were changing into something else. And whatever was causing the Change was connected to those beautiful lights dancing across the Alaska sky. I decided to dig deeper into the hospital's records. During my break, I accessed the patient database using the terminal in the housekeeping office. I was looking for patterns going back further than just this Aurora season. What I found made my blood run cold. The symptoms I'd been observing weren't new. Going back 5 years, every Aurora season brought similar cases. But the hospital's response to them had been evolving. In earlier years, the notes were confused, uncertain. Doctors couldn't explain the symptoms and discharged patients when they seemed to improve. But in recent years, there were more detailed observations, specialized tests, and references to consultations with researchers I'd never heard of. I found references to something called Project Northern Light in several patient files. It wasn't a treatment protocol I recognized, and when I tried to access those files directly, my access was denied. That had never happened before. I'd always been able to view basic patient information for cleaning and safety purposes. The next night, I decided to explore those restricted areas in the basement. I'd worked in this hospital for 5 years and never questioned why certain rooms were off-limits to janitorial staff. Now I needed to know what was down there. The basement level has a different feel than the rest of the hospital. The lighting is dimmer, the air circulation different. Most of it is storage and mechanical systems, but there's a section behind the morgue that requires a different keycard access level. I'd seen doctors go down there occasionally, always alone, always after normal hours. Using my master key, I managed to get into the outer corridor, but the doors to the actual laboratories required additional authentication. Through the reinforced glass windows, I could see what looked like medical research equipment, microscopes, centrifuges, specimen storage units. But there were also tanks containing what appeared to be tissue samples suspended in fluid and monitoring equipment I didn't recognize. On the desk, visible through one window, I saw patient files with photos clipped to them. The photos showed close-ups of human skin with what looked like subcutaneous movement, the bumps and ridges shifting beneath the surface, like something was crawling underneath. The files were labeled with dates going back 3 years, all during Aurora seasons. I managed to get into one room that wasn't fully secured. It appeared to be a storage area for this secret research. Among the supplies, I found specimen containers filled with what looked like tiny, translucent organisms. They were barely visible to the naked eye, but under the magnifying glass on the workbench, I could see they were definitely alive, pulsing and moving in the preservation fluid. There were research notes scattered on the workbench, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. The notes mentioned extraterrestrial microorganisms, magnetosphere contamination, and host adaptation protocols. One page had a diagram showing how these organisms could enter the human respiratory system and migrate to the circulatory system within hours of exposure. But the most disturbing discovery was a list of names, patients who had been discharged from the hospital over the past 3 Aurora seasons. Next to each name,